Something extraordinary happened to the global workforce beginning in 2020. An invisible line was drawn in history, separating the way work used to function from the way it operates today. And here is the remarkable truth: even as offices reopened, even as commutes resumed, even as conference rooms filled back up, nothing actually went back to the way it was before. The rules had changed permanently. The expectations had shifted forever. And the culture of the modern workplace had been rewritten in ways that most people are still only beginning to understand. Welcome back to Trend Now Daily. Today we are diving deep into one of the most significant societal transformations of our generation: how remote work permanently changed office culture, and what that means for every worker, every leader, and every organization on the planet right now. To understand just how dramatic this transformation was, you need to appreciate what office culture looked like before 2020. For most of the 20th century and well into the 21st, the office was considered the only legitimate place where real work happened. Productivity was measured by physical presence. Managers equated visibility with value. If your boss could see you sitting at your desk, you were considered dedicated. If you were working from home, you were considered suspect. The phrase "working from home" was often spoken with barely concealed skepticism in professional circles. The 5-day office workweek was essentially sacred. Companies invested billions in commercial real estate, open-plan offices, catered lunches, and ping-pong tables, all designed to make the physical office feel like the center of professional life. According to pre-pandemic statistics, only about 5% of American workers primarily worked from home before 2020. Remote work existed at the margins, tolerated occasionally, never truly embraced at scale. Then March 2020 arrived and changed everything overnight. Within weeks, roughly 60% of American workers who could work remotely began doing so. Similar patterns emerged across Europe, Asia, and every developed economy globally. Companies that had spent years insisting remote work was impossible suddenly discovered it was not only possible but functional. Law firms, banks, advertising agencies, tech companies, healthcare administrators, all of them pivoted to distributed workforces with remarkable speed. The great remote work experiment had begun, not by choice, but by necessity. What no one anticipated was how profoundly that experiment would rewire human expectations. Millions of workers discovered something they had never been allowed to test before: that they could be highly productive, sometimes even more productive, outside of a traditional office environment. A landmark Stanford study conducted during this period found that remote workers showed a 13% productivity increase compared to their in-office counterparts. People were saving time previously lost to commuting, which in a major city could easily represent 2 to 3 hours every single day. Workers were reclaiming that time for deep focus, for family, for personal health, and for rest. The relationship between employees and employers began shifting in ways that would prove impossible to reverse. Workers started questioning assumptions they had accepted without examination for their entire careers. Why exactly did they need to drive 45 minutes each way to sit at a specific desk and do work that could clearly be accomplished from anywhere? Why were certain hours considered productive while others were not, regardless of actual output? These questions, once asked loudly and at scale, could not simply be unasked. By late 2021 and into 2022, as vaccination rates climbed and offices attempted to reopen, companies encountered something genuinely surprising: significant resistance. Workers who had experienced remote flexibility were reluctant to surrender it. And then came the phenomenon that economists and sociologists began calling the Great Resignation. In 2021 alone, approximately 47 million Americans voluntarily quit their jobs, a record-breaking number with no historical precedent. Research consistently showed that lack of remote work flexibility was among the top reasons cited by departing employees. Employers were forced to respond. And their response fundamentally transformed office culture in ways that are now deeply embedded in how organizations operate. The first major transformation was the widespread adoption of hybrid work models. Companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and thousands of smaller organizations introduced policies allowing workers to split their time between home and office. Microsoft's own internal data found that over 70% of workers wanted flexible remote work options to continue, while simultaneously over 60% wanted more in-person collaboration. This tension between flexibility and connection became the defining challenge of modern workplace culture. The physical office itself underwent dramatic reinvention. When companies realized that employees were only coming in 2 or 3 days per week, maintaining expensive real estate with rows of assigned desks became economically indefensible. Hot desking became mainstream, workers reserving shared workspaces rather than owning permanent desks. CBRE Group, one of the world's largest commercial real estate services firms, reported that office space utilization rates globally dropped permanently by 20 to 30% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Companies began redesigning office interiors away from individual workstations toward collaboration zones, meeting spaces, and social areas. The logic had shifted: if you could focus equally well at home, you came to the office specifically for human connection and creative collaboration, not for solitary task completion. Meeting culture experienced arguably its most dramatic overhaul in corporate history. Before 2020, the default response to nearly any business question was scheduling a meeting. Offices were filled with hour-long gatherings that could have been emails, attended by dozens of people whose presence was not genuinely necessary. The forced transition to video conferencing exposed this inefficiency mercilessly. When meetings moved to Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Google Meet, something became immediately apparent: unnecessary attendance was now easy to notice and easy to eliminate. Asynchronous communication tools like Slack, Notion, and Loom gained massive adoption, enabling teams to collaborate across time zones without requiring simultaneous availability. Many organizations began establishing explicit norms around communication that had never previously been written down. Policies about response time expectations, camera on versus camera off etiquette, meeting-free focus blocks, and documentation standards became standard components of company culture guides. This was entirely new behavior for most organizations. Before remote work, culture was largely transmitted through physical observation and informal interactions. When those disappeared, companies had to articulate their values and expectations explicitly, in writing, for the first time. Leadership itself was permanently transformed by this period. Managing remote teams requires an entirely different skill set than managing people in a shared physical space. The command and control management style, which had dominated corporate hierarchies for decades, was fundamentally incompatible with distributed teams. You cannot micromanage someone you cannot see. Leaders were forced to transition toward outcomes-based management, evaluating workers on results delivered rather than hours visibly spent. Research from Harvard Business Review found that managers who successfully adapted to remote leadership demonstrated significantly higher levels of trust-based communication, clearer goal setting, and more frequent one-on-one check-ins than their pre-pandemic counterparts. Employee well-being moved from an HR talking point to a genuine strategic priority during this transformation. The blurring of boundaries between professional and personal life that remote work created generated real and measurable mental health challenges. A 2021 survey by the American Psychological Association found that 79% of workers reported experiencing work-related stress, with digital overload and difficulty disconnecting from work being primary contributors. Companies that had never offered formal mental health support suddenly introduced therapy benefits, mandated time-off policies, meeting-free days, and digital detox guidelines. These investments in employee mental health have largely remained, representing a permanent cultural shift in how organizations think about the whole person behind the employee. Perhaps the most enduring cultural change has been the democratization of professional opportunity. Before remote work normalized, geographic location was a massive determinant of career trajectory. The best opportunities clustered in expensive cities: New York, San Francisco, London, Singapore. Remote work decoupled talent from geography in a way that proved permanently attractive to workers everywhere. Companies discovered that they could hire exceptional talent from anywhere in the world, often at significant salary savings, while workers in smaller cities and rural areas gained access to high-paying roles that would have required uprooting their entire lives previously. This geographic redistribution of professional opportunity has altered the cultural composition of workforces at major companies and shows no signs of reversing. Trust has emerged as the core currency of modern office culture.